Everybody's talking about Kanban, but they're not exactly sure what it is. In this video, I'm going to give you a quick and easy explanation what Kanban really is. So Kanban is one of many so-called software development methodologies. In this case, Kanban stems from the 1950s, where Toyota invented it for their so-called lean manufacturing process. Software development methodologies are used as some sort of a framework for software teams all around the world when developing new software. They should give us guidance on the following questions before, after, and especially during software development. How can we break down a big project into many small tasks? In what order should we work on these tasks? How many tasks should we be working on in parallel? What stages can those tasks be in when we are working on them? How do we define if a task is finished? How to communicate to outside stakeholders, so people other than the engineering team, what we are working on, and why we prioritize the tasks like we do. So Kanban is one of the Agile software methodologies, and I'm sure you heard this term before. Instead of having a big project where it has multiple phases and we run through those phases one time, in Agile methodologies we have iterations which typically last only a couple of weeks, and the software team runs through those iterations many times. So let me give you an example. One of the older methodologies is the so-called waterfall model. It has 5 phases which are being run through once, and after finishing the last of those 5 phases, the project is over, done. So what are those 5 phases? Phase 1 is the so-called requirements gathering phase. You have all kinds of people, the software team and the stakeholders, working on gathering a requirements list. So the question is, what should this software be able to do? Phase 2, the actual piece of software is getting designed. No coding yet, but we draw out what that software, which fulfills all those requirements, will look like. In the third phase, the actual piece of software gets developed by the software developers. In phase 4, the software developers hand off their software, their finished software, to some sort of a quality assurance team, and they do the so-called verification. The verification verifies if the software, which was developed in phase 3, fulfills all the requirements from the first phase. And in the last phase, the 5th one, it's about maintenance, maintaining the software, fixing bugs, and so on. So that's the waterfall model, and that's one of the older sequential methodologies. So Kanban is one of the Agile methodologies, and you can imagine it like many tiny waterfall sequences after each other. So the software team starts working on one iteration. It goes through a small design phase, a small implementation phase, and a small verification phase. And then when the software team decides it makes sense, they deliver or release this piece of software. And then it starts over from the beginning. So when does the software team decide to deliver a piece of software? This is a very important piece of Kanban. As soon as they have a piece of software which works and is releasable, they release it to their stakeholders or to their customer. And they tend to release those smaller pieces of software as soon and as many times as possible. So typically, every couple of weeks they release a piece of software. There are rather few rules in Kanban. For example, the length of an iteration is not defined. You can have one iteration which is 1 week and the next one could be 2 or 3 weeks. But there is one very important principle in Kanban, and it's about limiting the work in progress. So the tasks which the software team works on in parallel have a limit. For example, there can only be 5 or maybe 10 tasks which are worked on at the same time, depending on the size of the project team. This has the aim of eliminating as many context switches as possible, context switches between tasks which those engineers are working on, and therefore making the development process more efficient. Okay, now let's take a look at the Kanban process in more detail. It all centers around the Kanban board. The board can be a physical board which is in the office, in front of all the engineers, or it could be a digital board in a computer system. The tasks itself are represented as sticky notes. Those sticky notes, they mostly just have an ID and the name of the task on it. And the sticky notes are being put on the board. The board has columns which are called lanes. And those lanes represent one step in every iteration of the software team. So mostly on the left side of the board, there could be a lane called planning or planning phase. Then there could be an implementation lane, and to the right there will be some sort of a testing lane, and then a done lane. So tasks go from left to right, from one step to another. And every day when the teams meet at their usual 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, whatever, daily stand-up, they talk about what progress they made the day before, and they move those sticky notes, they move the tasks from one lane to the next one. So I mentioned this very important principle of limiting the work in progress. And actually the Kanban board itself helps to enforce this rule or this principle. Because not only does the Kanban board have a couple of columns where you can visualize each task and what step this task is at the moment, it also has a limited amount of rows. And those rows naturally limit the number of tasks which could be in each step, but also the number of tasks which can be on the board in general. After a while, the tasks which started on the left side in the planning phase, they're being worked on, they go to a development, implementation phase, and then they end up on the right side on the done lane, so to say. So after a certain while, this done lane starts to fill up, and the software team will make the decision to pack up all the tasks in the done lane and pack them into a working piece of software they release to their customers and their stakeholders. Based on that release, they will get some feedback and they will write down new tasks, and they'll put those new tasks in some sort of a backlog, where the backlog, you can imagine it like a stack or a collection of tasks which have to be worked on at some point in time. So then when the left side of the Kanban board slowly gets empty because they worked on the majority of the tasks, they prioritize the items they have on their backlog or in their collection of tasks, and they'll put them up on the planning side of the board, and they'll start working on those tasks again. In an upcoming video, we will be talking about other Agile methodologies, for example Scrum, and we'll compare Scrum and Kanban with each other. And now a call to action. I want to make a video about why we feel so strongly about Scrum and Kanban and other methodologies. I want to find out why we have such strong feelings about the way we plan and implement and deliver software. Please leave me some thoughts in the comments, and I'll try to make an interesting video about that topic. So that's it for today's video. Please subscribe to this channel. As I said, leave some comments about Scrum versus Kanban and other methodologies. My name is Ramon Lopez, and this is Success in Tech.